The soldiers laughed the moment they saw her step into the firing range. She looked far too small to hold any weapon, and her calm expression made it seem like she had wandered into the wrong place. The range was no playground, it was the place where the toughest men came to test their skill under the watchful eye of the colonel, who was known for his strict discipline and sharp judgment. She walked in with steady steps, her eyes scanning the line of targets as if she had already measured the distance and calculated the path of every bullet before even touching a weapon. The colonel stood at the far end of the range, his arms folded across his chest, watching her with a smirk. He had seen all kinds of recruits and visitors over the years, but never someone like her. She did not wear the uniform, she did not carry herself like a soldier, and yet there was no hesitation in the way she approached the line. The other soldiers exchanged amused glances, one even muttered that she would not last a single shot, but she did not seem to hear them, or perhaps she simply chose not to respond. Her request to fire was met with light-hearted disbelief. The colonel raised an eyebrow, asking her if she was certain, but she nodded without a word. He waved a hand, signaling that she could proceed, thinking it would be nothing more than a brief moment of entertainment for the men. He expected her to lift the weapon clumsily and miss the target entirely, just as many overconfident visitors had done before. There in the range was thick people with curiosity. As she stepped up to the firing line, she looked smaller than ever, standing in the place where hardened soldiers usually took their position, but her posture was steady, her breathing calm. She glanced at the weapon in front of her, studying it briefly before picking it up, as if she had done so countless times before. Her hands wrapped around it with ease, her fingers settling in just the right place without hesitation. The soldiers whispered quietly from behind the safety line, betting on how quickly she would fail. Some laughed softly, others shook their heads, already certain of the outcome. The colonel watched with his usual confidence that his range would prove too much for her, but she ignored all of them, her focus entirely on the target ahead. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, the way someone does when they see not just the surface but the exact point they intend to hit. The moment hung in the air for a few seconds. Longer than expected, she stood perfectly still, as if the world around her had gone silent, and in that moment the colonel felt something strange in the air, a shift so subtle he could not place it. She was not nervous, she was not overwhelmed, she was simply ready, and though no one knew it yet, the laughter that had filled the room was about to disappear forever. She practiced quietly away from the crowd, determined to prove them all wrong, but no one in the firing range knew that this was not the first time she had picked up a weapon. Her confidence was not born from arrogance, it was built from years of disciplined training and an unshakable focus that she had carried in silence long before she stepped onto this range. She had trained in places far from the eyes of doubters, where skill mattered more than appearance, where every movement was measured and perfected. While the soldiers thought she was wasting their time, she was studying the range carefully, her eyes tracing the distance to each target. She noted the placement, the light, the subtle drift of air that might shift the path of a bullet. Her breathing was steady, her heartbeat calm. She did not allow the noise around her to disturb her mind. She had learned long ago that true precision came from silence, both outside and inside. Death Colonel leaned back against the table, still amused, but now faintly curious. There was something unusual in the way she prepared. She was not rushing, she was not fumbling with the weapon. She was simply waiting for the right moment, as if she could already see the outcome before she even took the first shot. The other soldiers noticed it. Some stopped laughing, their eyes narrowing as they wondered if they were missing something. She lifted the weapon slowly, not with hesitation, but with control, her movements smooth like a motion she had repeated hundreds of times. Her stance was balanced, her shoulders relaxed, her grip firm yet calm. The weapon became an extension of her hands, the way it does for someone who understands it deeply. She did not fidget, she did not adjust endlessly. She was ready, and she had been ready from the moment she walked through the door. The colonel called out the order, allowing her to take aim. His voice carried the weight of command, but she did not flinch. She brought the weapon into line, her eyes narrowing slightly as the sight aligned with the first target. She drew in a breath, slow and controlled, then released it until her body was as Still as stone, the sound of laughter had faded, now replaced by an almost uneasy silence as everyone waited for the sound that would follow. Every soldier present had seen hundreds of shots taken on this range, some perfect, many flawed, but there was something about the stillness around her that was different. The colonel felt it too, though he did not admit it aloud. She seemed unshaken by the pressure, the stares, the doubt. She seemed focused on something far beyond the paper target in front of her, as though this moment was not a test for her but a confirmation of what she already knew. Seconds stretched longer than they should, her finger resting near the trigger, her breathing steady, her eyes locked, and in that quiet moment the soldiers began to realize this was not going to go the way they expected. A challenge came when the elite team struggled to hit an impossible target. It was a drill the colonel had set up many times before, one that tested even the most skilled shooters. At the range, a narrow target placed far beyond the usual mark, designed to prove just how difficult perfection could be. The SEAL team had tried, each one taking their turn, precision and power in every shot, but even they missed by fractions there. Frustration growing as the target stood untouched, the colonel called for another attempt. The men lined up again, but the result was the same, near-perfect shots, yet never quite enough to claim the record. It was a test that humbled even the strongest marksman, and the colonel was certain it would keep its reputation today. He turned back toward her, still amused that she had even come to the range, let alone stayed this long, but before he could speak, she stepped forward, her calm presence drawing every eye in the room. The soldiers exchanged skeptical glances, whispering among themselves. They had seen experienced men fail this shot again and again, and yet here was a girl who had not even been taken seriously an hour ago, walking toward the position without hesitation. The colonel raised an eyebrow, asking if she was sure she wanted to take that particular target. She nodded without a single word, her confidence quiet but unshakable. Throne grew quieter as she picked up the weapon, the same one the SEAL team had just used. She did not check it with nervous hands. She did not stall or overthink her stance. She simply adjusted her footing, locked her eyes on the target, and let the silence settle around her, her breathing steadier. Focus absolute. She seemed untouched by the weight of expectation or the doubt in the room. One of the SEALs leaned forward, slightly watching her movements closely, his expression shifting from amusement to interest as he realized there was nothing clumsy or uncertain about the way she prepared. The colonel felt it, to a subtle change in the air, a seriousness he had not expected. Her body language spoke of someone who had done this before, someone who understood the precision required for a shot like this. Raised the weapon smoothly, her arms steady, as if holding the weight was effortless, her eyes aligned with the sight, her finger resting near the trigger. She drew in a slow, controlled breath and let it out. The range seemed frozen in time, every soldier waiting, the colonel leaning slightly forward, the world narrowing to the line between her and the distant target. Moment stretched endlessly, then without warning the sound of the shot cracked through the air, a sharp echo bouncing off the walls. The target jerked sharply and a perfect mark appeared dead center. Silence followed. No one spoke, no one moved. The impossible shot had just been made by the one person no one believed could even try. Her request to try was met with laughter and disbelief from the colonel, yet the laughter had faded into a silence none of them had expected. The target still stood at the far end of the range with a single perfect mark at its center, and the sound of that single shot still echoed in the minds of every person watching. The colonel stared at the target as if trying to convince himself that what he had just witnessed was some kind of trick. Soldiers who only moments ago had been certain of her failure now looked at her with a different expression. There was no more amusement, no more casual disbelief now. There was only a cautious respect and an unspoken question of how she had done it. She stood calm as ever, not celebrating, not drawing attention to herself, simply lowering the weapon and stepping back as though what she had just done was nothing more than routine. The colonel cleared his throat, the sound breaking the tension in the air. He asked her to take the position again, to repeat the shot, to prove it was not a fluke. She did not answer with words. She simply stepped forward, reloaded, and positioned herself with the same measured precision. Her movements were fluid, controlled, the same confidence in every motion. She lifted the weapon again, aligned her sight, and let the world narrow to the distant target. Second shot rang out, and again the impossible happened. Another perfect strike. This time the silence that followed felt heavier, as if the entire range had shifted into a new reality. The colonel no longer looked amused. Now he looked intrigued, perhaps even unsettled. He was a man who had trained some of the best marksmen in the world, yet in front of him stood someone who had walked in as a complete unknown and was now breaking through expectations without a single sign of struggle. SEALs themselves now stepped closer, their competitive instincts stirred. They wanted to see more, to understand how she had just done what they had trained for years to perfect. The colonel ordered a more difficult test, setting up a series of targets at varying distances, a challenge that demanded precision, speed, and control. This was a test that pushed even the elite. Tesh nodded again with no hesitation. Moving into position, the soldiers watched closely. The colonel crossed his arms, waiting for the smallest mistake, but the shots came in rapid sequence, each one hitting its mark without hesitation. It was as if she had trained her entire life for this very moment, each bullet landing perfectly, each target falling exactly as intended. By the time the last target was struck, the room was no longer in doubt. The colonel stood still, his usual expression unreadable, but his eyes fixed on her as though trying to piece together everything he had just witnessed. The laughter that had greeted her arrival was gone, completely replaced by an unspoken realization that something extraordinary had just walked into his range zone. By one, she shattered records that even the toughest SEALs failed to touch. The colonel decided the first shot could have been luck, the second could have been coincidence, but the next series would prove whether this was skill or chance. He ordered the range adjusted. New targets placed at angles and distances that demanded the very best from any shooter. The SEALs stood back, crossing their arms, curious to see if she could maintain that same impossible precision. She stepped forward without hesitation, her face calm, her breathing steady. She looked over the new setup, briefly calculating each distance and each shift in position. She did not pause to ask questions. She did not check her weapon over and over. She simply adjusted her stance with the same quiet confidence that had unsettled the entire range from the moment she arrived. The colonel stood to the side this time, not smirking, not dismissing, just watching carefully. The order was given, and she raised the weapon smoothly. The first target fell with a single clean shot. The second followed quickly without delay, each movement exact, each shot flowing naturally into the next. The soldiers behind her began to murmur again, but their voices were low this time, almost reluctant to disturb the precision they were watching. She shifted to the next target at a difficult angle and struck it cleanly on the first try. The colonel's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in focus. He was studying her as if trying to map the path of her movement. Third round was set up, moving targets, spinning at unpredictable speeds, the kind that took both control and instinct. She did not change her composure, her eyes locked onto each target with a precision that seemed effortless. The shots cracked through the range in perfect rhythm, each strike exact, no wasted movement, no wasted time. By the time the last one fell, there was no longer any doubt in the room. This was not luck, this was mastereth. SEALs who had failed earlier exchanged glances, some smiling slightly in quiet respect, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They knew what it meant to hit one perfect shot under pressure, but to hit them all, to maintain focus and control across every scenario, was something they rarely saw outside of the most elite shooters in the world. The colonel turned toward the scoreboard where her results were displayed, line after line of flawless scores. The room was silent except for the sound of the range officer marking the results. Her performance had not just surpassed the record, it had erased it entirely, setting a new standard so far above the previous one that it seemed untouchable. She lowered the weapon once more, not triumphant, not boastful, simply steady as she placed it back down and stepped away, her expression unchanged. The colonel met her eyes for a moment and gave a short nod, one that carried more weight than any applause ever could. A impossible shot made her a legend and silenced every voice of doubt. The range stood Still, for a long moment after the last target fell, the echo of the shot still hanging in the air, the colonel lowered his arms slowly, his usual commanding presence softened by something closer to disbelief, but also respect. He had trained the best shooters. He had seen men and women push themselves to the limit, but what he had just witnessed was something rare, a level of skill that went beyond talent. It was the kind of mastery that came from years of quiet discipline and relentless practice. The SEALs who had come to test their own abilities now stood gathered near her, their earlier amusement replaced by a sense of genuine respect. One of them stepped forward, extending a hand. Without a single word, she shook it simply, her calm presence unchanged, as if she had not just broken a record, but simply completed something she always knew she could do. There was no celebration, no boasting, just the steady confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and yet had proven everything. The colonel walked toward her slowly, each step measured. The smirk that had greeted her at the door was long gone, replaced by an expression of deep consideration. He asked her where she had learned to shoot like that, his voice quieter now, lacking the edge it once carried. She simply looked at him for a moment, her answer brief, saying only that she had trained for a long time. He understood without pressing further. Some skills spoke for themselves and required no long explanation. The range officer stepped in quietly, placing the results on the table, the numbers almost unbelievable. The old record that had stood for years now replaced by her name, and a score so far above the rest that it felt as if the standard for excellence had shifted entirely. The colonel picked up the paper, glanced at it once, and then looked back at her, his nod this time slower, heavier, as if he was acknowledging not just the numbers but the presence of someone who had earned a place in the respect of everyone who had doubted her. Soldiers around her no longer looked at her as a visitor or an outsider. Now they looked at her as an equal, maybe even as someone who had outdone them in their own world. She stepped away from the firing line, placing the weapon down carefully as if closing a chapter. The room stayed quiet as she walked toward the door, no one stopping her, no one doubting her, not anymore. As she left the range, the colonel watched her go, still holding the paper with her record score. He knew he had just witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. There would be other shooters, there would be other records, but this moment would remain a story told in the range for years to come, about the day a girl walked in and without a single boast, without a single misstep, made history with a steady hand and a perfect shot.